Good morning, ladies, and welcome back to Bernama. Today we have an exclusive interview this morning, and we are talking about the Communications of Multimedia Content Forum of Malaysia, and joining us is its Executive Director, Muhammad Mustafa Fazil. He comes in from his busy schedule to walk us through what CMCF is all about. Now, if you don't know what CMCF is all about, we're going to give you some information on that today and how we as Malaysian citizens are a very big part of CMCF. Now, Encik Mustafa, it is very interesting to know that CMCF has been doing a lot of work in the background, but we, most of us don't know about it. Now, let's just walk or get an overview of what CMCF is all about.
Well, essentially, CMCF, which stands for the Communications and Multimedia Content Forum of Malaysia, is an industry body, right? But it's been mandated under the Communications and Multimedia Act 1998 to actually carry out self-regulation for the media industry, especially we're talking about electronic media, so that covers mediums like TV, radio, internet, as well as the mobile platform. So essentially, in terms of the regulatory part of it, what we fight for or what we promote is actually the concept of self-regulation. We know that the content industry is a very large industry nowadays, and there's a lot of content which is very subjective, and it moves at a very dynamic pace. So sometimes if you were to have a prescriptive kind of regulation, it might not catch up to the developments of the technology and whatnot. So in this regard, what the CMCF has done is actually come up with our own content code, and it is registered with the government as well, but at the same time it is promoting our industry players to actually go via this code to self-regulate themselves, whereby what they have achieved so far is that they can actually do they've been given some autonomy to actually regulate the content that they're actually bringing out. Either it is something that they've aggregated or something that they've created. Right. So in this regard, it is a matter of, in a way, self-discipline that the industry players have actually imposed upon themselves.
Now, what's interesting is you brought up the pace technology is moving at, and content is also diversifying quite a bit. Now, let's take music, for example. You know, you can break it down into different genres and sub-genres, like, okay, there's blues, rock, R&B, and then it breaks down to house music, electronic. Does that happen with content, or with regards to content? Do we pigeonhole them? Well, to make things easier? Well,
in a sense, how we actually look into these kinds of content is that we do provide minimum standards. It can be any kind of genre of content, but we provide minimum standards. Some of these minimum standards may actually, not to say pigeonhole, but classify them in a sense. Say, for example, maybe certain content might be deemed to some as violent or obscene or indecent, for that matter, but not necessarily for another group of people. So these minimum standards are the ones that we classify for everybody, not only for the media practitioners to look at and to evaluate their content against it, but also for the general public in terms of what they're viewing. If they find that okay, this content might be objectionable, then they will have certain rights that they can exercise in regards to that content.
Right, which brings about another question. CMCF is made up of ordinary member categories. Now, how many categories are there? And when you talk about categories, how do you differentiate between what you just said and categories?
Right, okay, so when we talk about the content, I have, like I mentioned, that is specifically in terms of, in a way, some form of content measurement, you know, so we have those minimum standards. But in terms of the players themselves in CMCF, we have 6 main categories, being the advertisers, the audio tech service providers, or the mobile guys.
Audio tech service providers.
Yeah, okay. So those are the mobile, those operating on mobile platforms. Broadcasters, content creators and distributors, the internet access service providers, as well as civic groups. So we have got a mishmash of the visual, the audio, the voice of the public, as well as certain academic institutions that are within our stable of membership. Right. So at the current moment, we have about 47 members comprising of all these 6 categories.
So by and large, CMCF, what CMCF does is monitor. Do you monitor?
Well, not to say we don't monitor per se, because if you're looking at if you're looking at monitoring per se, that would defeat, in a sense, some area of self regulation.
That's it.
But what we do some content monitoring at our own behest at CMCF to look into specific areas where sometimes a particular content might be something that goes against the content code, for example.
If there are red flags standing out, then
like
you need to have a finger on the pulse, so to speak, to understand what's happening within the industry.
And now, we do some random monitoring as well, in a sense.
So when you say random monitoring, how is random monitoring done?
In a sense, we will look at, say, for example, websites, for example. Certain websites we will look at from time to time to see whether there are any content which may be of issue, but some may not. So if there are of issue, then we may take action against it, or even it can even be a TV or radio broadcast for that matter.
Right.
So at certain times we may be perusing through certain channels, and if something that we feel that it should be flagged up,
if they found out that Gerard just said something wrong, Gerard is going to get it. No, but with content, what's interesting is there's a lot of stuff, especially on social media. A lot of people put a lot of things up, and at every minute of the day there's something interesting coming up, or something that's a fallacy, or which is untrue. Now, how do people work with CMCF in order to get some kind of recourse or like help with regards to something wrong that's been said about them?
Well, we approach it from two aspects. One of it is actually awareness and knowledge. So in this regard, is about propagating what's in the content code and telling them that there are certain kinds of content which should be at a certain level of decency, for example. So that's a starting point. If they do have that knowledge, then they can either do some self-regulation in terms of the content that they're pushing out, or they can also be our lookout, in a sense, where they see content which is objectionable, then they can forward a complaint to us. So in this regard, being a regulator, we can also enforce certain actions through the content code, in which we have our complaints bureau. So the complaints bureau is also empowered to actually take out certain penalties and sanctions should there be any breach of the content code.
Right. So now the complaint bureau handles complaints coming in from the public. Now, how long does it take for the complaints bureau to act or to work on a certain problem?
We will immediately take up any case that's been submitted to us. However, the time taken to actually address a particular complaint will depend on its complexity, will depend on the information that's available, and will depend on certain investigation that we have to take. There are things which are trending, and therefore you might have a lot of information about it, but there may be certain obscure things that it may take time for us to go through other resources, or look at other source of information to actually evaluate the content and see whether it is a breach or not.
So by and large, an investigation has to be carried out.
Yes, definitely.
And whatever that's being said or whatever that's being complained about has to be verified first, and then you can act on it. So that you cannot give a time frame as to how long that would take.
It can be within several days, or it can be up to a few weeks. It depends on the complexity of the complaint. Whenever we talk about much more complex type of complaints, it may be that we receive from the industry players themselves. So these industry players also become a check and balance on their to their own peers. So sometimes this kind of complaints may take much longer because there is a lot of evidence that we may have to look through. Especially if the content makes claims have to be substantiated, there have to be some write-up on it or whatever, and they have to provide. So these documentations, for example, may take some time. So again, it depends on the type of complaint.
But it's interesting to know that you are out there to also hand a sort of service or offer a service to the public. Now, is this gaining traction? Is the public warming up to it and saying, yes, we have problems, we're going to see you, or if we're not sure about anything, we're going to call CMCF? Are things like that beginning to happen?
Oh, definitely, yes. I think since CMCF has been around for 15 years, in fact, and our executive office has been around for about 10 years of that. And year on year, we do carry out a lot of our awareness activities. One of the things that we have noticed is that there's been a lot of there's been an increase in complaints that have been submitted by members of the public. So the complaints, say about 10 years ago, which may range to about 5 to 10, we get about 500 plus complaints a year now. You know, so the escalation of complaints do coincide with our campaigns, do coincide with our road shows, so on and so forth. So there's been many instances as well that they do call us for advice.
Right.
So when it comes to certain advices, we don't really treat it as a complaint, but more as a direct service to actually advise people. We have our toll-free number as well, aside from our social media outlets, as well as our main contact points.
Right. So there are various avenues and touch points with regards to getting in touch with our friends at CMCF. Now, I'm sure you have a team that's working under you, and how big is this team?
Well, currently, we have about 7 to 8 persons in my team, but in a way,
I really thought it was going to be hundreds.
No, for us, that's about it.
That's
at the
about
moment.
it. So it's a lot of work.
And we cover nationwide, and of course, because we are very focused in dealing with content-related issues only.
Right.
So that is why we are able to actually, keep the team running. Of course, we would increase it as time goes by, but at the current moment, that's what we have, and we operate nationwide.
So since the year is coming to a close, and everyone's, what's trending at the end of the year is everyone's wrapping the year with, what they saw and what happened during the year. What kind of complaints? What is the highest that you received in 2016?
I think there's been a lot still for the past several years. Complaints related to the internet side. A lot of it has been a bit on social media, but it does swing from certain types of complaint to another. Previously, in the early start of CMCF, we have a lot of complaints on broadcasting, TV and radio, for example. That's been that's been the main media channel for people to focus on. But over the years, you can see the shift.
Right.
So internet content has been more. The complaints on internet content has been coming up much more.
Okay, this curiosity kills the cat. What were the complaints coming out from radio and TV?
Well, essentially, I would say that much of it has been on advertising content, followed by programs itself.
Right.
So if you're looking at more on TV, then firstly, like I said, advertising, followed by certain programs which people may watch and feel that
it's offensive.
It's either offensive or it's a bit indecent. So we have to evaluate, we have to investigate, and we go through the whole 9 yards before we actually come up with a decision.
And if you find that your investigation doesn't warrant for any action to be taken, do you get in touch with the person who's made the complaint and to give the person an explanation?
Always. We always close the loop in terms of our complaints handling. So it is imperative for anybody to complain to also provide their details, because there are instances where they did not provide their details, and our complaints bureau requires more information, and we can't contact the complainant, and that provides some difficulties. So where there is a lack of information, there have been instances where we could not proceed because the complainant did not leave any contact information, for example.
But one would have thought, when it comes to complaints, the highest would come from telcos and problems with telcos. Do you receive complaints with regards to telcos and internet usage too?
Well, some, but not necessarily so much on usage or services. That is handled by our sister forum. But for us at CMCF, our main focus is only on content.
Right. So when people, what you're saying is when people make a complaint or report a complaint, they are quite sure as to who to call.
We have seen an escalation of that awareness, and we're pretty proud of it. But there's more work to be done year on year.
Well, if you're just joining us on the show, we're talking to the Executive Director of CMCF, Encik Muhammad Mustafa Fazil. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about content code. Do you know what content code is? Well, if you don't, stay with us. We're going to give you a 101 on what content code is with regards to CMCF right here on Thursday's edition of Bernama Today. Stay with us. We'll be back right after this short break.
Nation, a talk show from the Current Affairs desk celebrating diversity, with in-depth conversations on health, women, property, culture and performing arts. Only on Bernama News Channel.
Mengupas isu semasa, merangkumi politik, ekonomi, sukan serta hiburan. Membawakan anda agenda pentas dunia. Saksikan Ruang Bicara setiap Isnin hingga Jumaat 10 malam di BNC.
Dan informasi sahih, tepat, mantap. Pertama di lokasi, dari segenap pelusuk negara. Saksikan Buletin Bernama hanya di Bernama News Channel.
Good morning, Malaysia, and welcome back to Bernama. Today we're currently speaking to the Executive Director of CMCF. CMCF is the acronym for the Communications of Multimedia Content Forum of Malaysia. Joining me in the studio is Encik Muhammad Mustafa Fazil. We just gave you an overview as to what CMCF is and talked about certain things with regards to complaints from the public, and this is about content over broadcast or TV or free-to-air TV or the internet, so on and so forth. Now, there is a content code. Now, what is this content code? There's a book here and it shows you very simply content code. Now, what's this all about and how is this linked to us? Let's talk about the content code.
Well, essentially the content code is actually a set of guidelines, but it contains minimum standards for electronic content.
Right.
That is either to be when you either create or access. So this level of content that we have is basically quite tagged to our Malaysian cultural norms,
Right.
because this in effect is something that is related to what we term as social regulation. It is very much Malaysian centric, and it takes into account the social and cultural norms of Malaysians, regardless of age, gender, religion and race. So the minimum standards that we put is something that can be essentially also taken up by anyone, and you know, it is like I said, it is not specific to sex, race or gender. So therefore what we have is something which is supposed to be acceptable to everybody.
Right.
If it's not, then you have all the right that you have to make a complaint about it.
So when you say minimum, what is the minimum? You know, what is a minimum guideline? Self-regulatory minimum guideline. Now, how would you explain this so simply? Put it in a nutshell for us.
Well, okay.
Let's talk about the you and me who are going to the internet to write stuff. Okay.
Well, there shouldn't be any pornography.
Okay.
There is almost what do you call this? A definite standard already, right? So and if it's not the internet, let's say for example we take broadcasting for example, there shouldn't be so much of a imitable violence, for example, because that's quite a social norm. We do not want our kids, for example, to actually look at any kind of programs and have imitable violence that can endanger themselves, for example. So these are, among others, the kinds of minimum standard we're looking at. Probably different areas will have different types of minimum standards, but what we want is to actually inculcate certain knowledge to people that these standards do change from time to time, you know. So we have to be able to actually identify what would be the current issues at hand, and therefore feedback. This feedback normally comes into the complaint side,
Right.
So it is not only what it is entrenched in the content code, but it's also what is out there. So for us to actually put everything all in the content code at one go will be very difficult. So it is a living kind of document that we're talking about, this content code. If you were to have it to be too prescriptive, it might be curtailing the imagination or the creative industry. We do not want that. So the minimum standards that we have had is something that's been drawn up by the industry members and supported by the government by having this code registered with the MCMC, and everybody's following the same rules, so to speak.
When you talk to stakeholders, what do they say about this? Are there complaints about this, or are they okay with the standards set for them, the regulations and the guidelines that have been set? What are stakeholders saying at this point?
Well, insofar as how that turns out, because they have had a big role in actually creating the content code, everybody's following it in terms of the media practitioners. What we are looking right now is hopefully that we are undertaking a review of the code in the coming year, and we hope that new standards can be implemented, because for the past 10 years,
new standards mean new standards come about with the changing times and the changing trends.
So it can be a relaxation of certain standards, or it can be enforcement of sorts on certain other standards, and maybe introduction of new ones. Now that we've gone into the digital age in a big way, so therefore we're looking at probably new areas that we have to address.
Now, when it comes to conforming to guidelines, say if one doesn't conform or follow the guidelines or self-regulatory guidelines given to everyone, what can be done? What action can be taken?
Where there is a breach of the content code, there are three main things that our Complaints Bureau can actually impose. First being a reprimand, and secondly being a fine not exceeding 50,000 ringgit, and then the third one is to seize the offending act and to remove the content. So it can be these are the three main ones, but it can be a combination or any sort of how do you say, application of the three. What we have told our stakeholders essentially, though, is that by following the code, however, there is a provision that you will be protected against prosecution if you can prove that you have followed the code in creating the content. And if that can happen, if you are able to follow the code, and despite whatever complaints, but you have followed the code, you're protected. But if you did not follow the code and there can be found to be a breach, then that's where the penalties and sanctions can come in.
Now, I don't know whether this is within your area of discussion or something you can discuss about, but one of the biggest topics in the world right now, also in Malaysia, we've had a couple of people come and talk about it, is child pornography, and everyone's doing their best to stop this. Now, what is your role in this? What is CMCF's role in this?
Well, almost in all other types of problematic areas regarding electronic content, we feel that knowledge and awareness is key. We have had many clinics, many seminars, not only with the media, but also people out there, schools, universities, and other government or non-government bodies as well. And what we found out is that the knowledge in terms of how we approach this kind of content can be lacking. So if we're looking at, say for example, child pornography, there seems to be a disparity in terms of knowledge on how to treat this kind of content, either from the child themselves or from the adult. So we understand very much that one can classify any kind of sort of like or rather a need to watch child pornography could be a mental issue and whatnot, but doesn't mean that you can get away with it. Wrong is still wrong. So what we have told, what we have propagated in terms of our seminars and roadshows is that you have to identify what can be termed as child pornography, what can be termed as pornography in effect, and therefore how to not go and indulge yourself in that, either through websites or either through even downloaded content or what have you. So we provide the knowledge to say that this kind of content is a no-no. Henceforth, take these kinds of action. So we train the teachers, we tell the kids as well, you know, in terms of what shouldn't be looked at, what kind of warnings to look at, and stay away from certain kinds of so-called well-known websites.
Right. We've got about 30 seconds left. Your message to Malaysia with regards to CMCF and what's to come in 2017?
Well, for 2017, the CMCF seeks to open up further campaigns that we have in terms of promoting self-regulation to all, and we hope that everybody takes into account that this is not something trivial. Whatever electronic content that comes in right now in so many forms and so many devices is easily accessible. It gets through your home, gets through your, you know, on your living room, family room, and what have you.
Through every device. Yeah,
everybody needs to play a role. Take serious consideration in terms of how you want to manage your household, in terms of how to allow content to be distributed amongst family members.
On that note, we'd like to thank Encik Muhammad Mustafa Fazil Muhammad Abdan. He is the Executive Director of CMCF, the Communications of Multimedia Content Forum of Malaysia. On behalf of the team right here at Bernama today, I'm Jared Ratnam signing off. You have a great day ahead. Mustafa, thank you very much for joining us.
No
Thank
problem.
you.